sign right there, Remi?
No, fine.
It's never an excuse. We learned that from Little League. Okay, good afternoon, everyone. Mayor de Blasio will make some remarks in a moment, and then Chief Mike LaPetri, our new Chief of Crime Control Strategies, on my left, will quantify the successes from 2019 and describe some of the issues we've identified over the past year. Let me start by thanking the men and women of the New York City Police Department for their part in keeping New Yorkers safe in 2019. From police officers, detectives, frontline supervisors, to civilian analysts, police administrative aides, people that first encounter victims when they come into a precinct, and many others. They all played a role in keeping New Yorkers safe. When New York City finds itself at this point in our history in terms of crime, to me is truly remarkable, especially as we look around the country and we see what some other large cities are up against. We've just ended a year in which we saw fewer overall index crimes than the previous year's record-setting lows. Nearly 900 fewer victims in 19 compared to 18. But as is always the case in our profession, there are areas of concern as well. Murders, shootings, and robberies all saw upticks, but I think perspective here is important. All three are coming off all-time lows and are still at incredibly low levels. But any uptick is of concern. Hate crimes are also up, specifically driven by anti-Semitism. Things such as swastikas and hate speech. To combat it, we have a fully staffed hate crimes task force under Inspector Mark Malinari. We have a new racially and ethnically motivated extremism unit under John Miller. And to address recent events, we have significantly bolstered our uniform presence in select areas of New York City. More than 150 police officers bolstered by auxiliary officers to make sure people are safe and feel safe as well. We also plan to incorporate hate crime stats into our CompStat reporting for the first time ever, because the best way to fight hate is by shining a light on it. All of this plays into the precision policing that keeps us focused on the true drivers of violence and disorder. And speaking to the effectiveness of neighborhood policing and our responsiveness in communities that feel under siege. I mentioned before the increase in murders and shootings. Fluctuations in occurrences are expected in our line of work, but this year's increases should certainly not be seen as a trend. We had a slight uptick in recorded murders that was driven by reclassified homicides, and we're still at historic low per capita, about 3.7 per 100,000. We continue to see a high percentage of crimes that are committed by gang members or have gang involvement, and we constantly work to identify who's involved and why they're involved. Together, we must make sure that the small percentage of people responsible for the majority of crime and violence are held accountable and that there are real consequences for their actions. Unfortunately, some people should be in jail. And think about that statement in 5 years, cutting arrests and incarceration 45% in this city. So we can say simultaneously both things. But let me be clear, the NYPD's youth-focused solution, however, aims to avoid that eventuality for young people. One piece of our new initiative focuses on addressing, preventing, and curbing youth violence. This month, we're establishing a monthly youth forum that I'll co-chair with Chief LaPetri that brings together members of our various district attorneys' offices, the Department of Probation, and many other stakeholders. For what purpose? To discuss best practices and fixes, especially as it relates to those youth-involved robberies. Collaborative ways to prevent youth violence. Our goal is to help young people steer clear of a first act of criminal behavior, or if they've already stumbled, to guide them back to the right path. In all of this, in everything that we're doing, we must never forget about the victims. Everything we do is geared toward reducing and preventing crime and to keeping people safe. And no one knows how to do it better, in my opinion, than the NYPD. And what we know is that reclaiming our neighborhoods requires the coordinated efforts of the entire police department, along with the full and willing partnership of all the people we serve. This is far more than just the NYPD. This is every city agency, every community-based organization, every elected official, really every resident. The same partners are the NYPD's critically important allies in countering the perpetual threat of terrorist attack in a city that remains the nation's principal target. And enhanced training, upgraded equipment, and cutting-edge technology, laws, in effect, tools, enabling the best cops in the nation to constantly improve on every front. It is our vow that we will not cede an inch in our mission to vigorously fight and prevent crime, while at the same time continuing to build trust with every resident in every neighborhood of New York City. The people who remain our greatest partners in ensuring the highest level of public safety for all. I'll leave you with this. 2020 promises to be a year of great opportunity. Another chapter in our history that will see even more NYPD successes realized on behalf of all New Yorkers. Through crimes and arrests prevented, many lives saved, families kept intact, and quality of life vastly improved. And ours is a crime-fighting model, as I've said before, of policing that I would say is worthy of being replicated across the nation. Mr. Mayor?
Thank you very much, Commissioner. First of all, a very happy New Year to everyone, and my congratulations to you, Commissioner, to all the leadership of the NYPD up here for all you have achieved in 2019, and of course to the men and women of the NYPD for their extraordinary efforts. I want to welcome as well to this afternoon Liz Glazer, Director of the Mayor's Office of Criminal Justice, and Deborah Lauder, the Executive Director of the Office for the Prevention of Hate Crimes, and thank both of them and their teams for the work they are doing. I want to pick up where the Commissioner left off, and I think the final statements you heard from him are really, really crucial to reflect on. First of all, thank you, Commissioner, for your focus on young people. We're going to be talking a lot about that in the months ahead. But this, to me, is a central point in how the NYPD will take us to the next step of building a safer city. We're already the safest big city in America. We intend to go farther in 2020, and that focus on youth, I think, is going to be a central part of the strategy that we need. But the fact is, this Commissioner is talking about how we prevent crime, how we think about all the crimes that do not have to happen and can be stopped, and how we do that, in fact, with fewer arrests and fewer people in jail simultaneously. That's an extraordinary agenda, and it's an agenda that in 2019 we proved actually works. We've got issues to deal with, there's no question, and I'll address that in a moment as well. There's no one up here who belittles even small upticks in areas of real concern. But the central question before us, the thing New Yorkers want to know is, are the basic strategies working? And I can certainly say after 6 years, I'm convinced that precision policing and neighborhood policing together is the winning strategy. The fact that 2019 represents a year where we had, once again, a decrease in the overall number of crimes, the fact that we have proven that these strategies continue to drive down crimes, continue to achieve things that were considered in many ways impossible before, this is the right direction. But we need to intensify it, and we need to add that focus on young people to go even farther. The basic facts: overall crime at a record low, while at the same time 180,000 fewer arrests last year compared to 6 years ago, and the lowest number we've seen of New Yorkers behind bars addressing the issue of mass incarceration. All of these things happen simultaneously. Neighborhood policing, I always remind people, in the scheme of things, has only just begun. And I think you're going to see in the year 2020 a deepening of these strategies and even closer coordination between neighborhood residents and the NYPD, and more information flowing to NYPD officers who need that information to keep everyone safe. The challenges are real. That uptick in murders is something we take very seriously, as well as the uptick we've seen in felony assault and robbery. I take it seriously. I know everyone up here does, and we believe we have strategies to fight that back. The important thing to remember about the NYPD, and I think this is a statement about the last 6 years, but also a statement about the last quarter century, this department's only moved in one direction, forward. We have to understand that there'll be always tough days along the way. But in the life of this city, the history of this city, the fact that for a quarter century we have seen sustained progress should give us all heart that this is an organization that knows how to make the right adjustments, knows how to create the strategies that will overcome any obstacle. So I'm convinced that we will drive back these problems and we will overcome them. The NYPD has, I think, shown extraordinary strategic agility. And under Commissioner Shea, I believe that that ability will only grow. So as we look ahead to 2020, here's my simple summation. I expect us to get safer. The challenges are real, and it will take an immense amount of hard work and creativity. We have to use every tool we have. But the outcome I expect and the outcome that I believe we will achieve is to make the city safer still and to help people feel safer. So we are looking forward to this year and to taking everything that has been learned and everything that's been achieved and building upon it. Let me say a few quick words in Spanish. En el año pasado, continuamos a bajar el crimen a un nuevo récord. Todavía hay dificultades, pero estoy seguro de que este departamento los enfrentará. Este año vamos a hacer la ciudad más grande, aún más segura. And with that, happy to turn to and congratulate, this is his first Crime Stats press conference in his new capacity, our new Chief of Crime Control Strategies, Mike LePetri.
Thank you, Mayor de Blasio, Police Commissioner Shea. Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. I would also like to extend a great job that the NYPD officers do every day to go out there and keep this city safe. As the Commissioner stated, I am Chief Mike LePetri, the Chief of Crime Control Strategies, and I'm here to discuss the end-of-the-year statistics. However, statistics are not just numbers, they are people, victims. Each number is a life, a family, a generation that is affected by violence. Behind each statistic is a story that the numbers don't portray. During my brief, I intend to provide a framework so that the victims don't get lost in the numbers that I will be sharing with you. As the Commissioner stated, we made good strides in 2019. New York City saw an overall reduction in the 7 major index crime categories. Crime decreased by 872 victims, or 0.9%. We plan to continue this trajectory until every person who resides, visits, or works in New York City is safe. In addition, the last 4 months of 2019 have seen record lows in shootings, particularly the month of December. This was the 4th consecutive month this year that we beat last year's lows, and 3 of the 4 months are historic lows. This is the safest December of the CompStat era, and the 4th quarter of 2019 is the safest era. Murder also follows the December trend in being the lowest in the CompStat era with 13. Although we have seen some historic lows in 2019, we also have concerns and do see some upticks that we need to alleviate. Murder, robbery, felony assault victims, and shooting incidents did increase slightly in 2019. Specifically, the borough of Manhattan as a whole saw an increase in all 4 of these categories in both patrol boroughs, Manhattan South and Manhattan North. We are working with our partners in the Southern District, New York County District Attorney's Office, Corporation Counsel, and other law enforcement partners, such as probation and parole, and the community, to make sure that the drivers of these violent acts are held accountable and dealt with appropriately. The NYPD and others need to continue to address ways to make sure that public safety will not be compromised due to a recent change in our laws. Discretion is such a large part of law enforcement, but our judges have been stripped of their discretion when assigning cash bail to defendants for all misdemeanors and certain felonies. The NYPD is laser focused on precision policing, community trust, and engagement. Currently, we do see a spike in hate crimes, which have no place in our city and will not be tolerated. The spike in hate crimes is driven by anti-Semitic motivation. Precisely the crimes that are spiking with that motivation are aggravated harassment and criminal mischief. 72% of those crimes involve swastikas or graffiti. Regardless of the severity of the hate crime, our commitment to eradicating these despicable crimes against the people of this city is unparalleled. We are and will continue to be resolute in doing all that we can to prevent such crimes, or in the event they occur, conduct the most thorough investigations so they can be prosecuted to the full extent. Commissioner Shea touched on youth-related robberies. We're seeing an increase in the city, especially in Manhattan. We're seeing a large increase in youth-related perpetrators and youth-related victims. Robbery victims under the age of 20, so teenage robbery victims have increased almost 43% since June. Teenage robbery victims represent 19% of all the robbery victims across the city. 14 and 15-year-old victims saw an increase of 250, and a lot of those kids were either coming or going to school. The best preventative method for a safer city and community is to start building a strong foundation with our youth. We have begun to address youth who not only already have been arrested, but have a potential to be involved in the criminal justice system. We need to engage our youth before a serious crime is committed or any justice involvement occurs. We have recently met with all our law enforcement partners, not only to develop a preventative practice, but to also see how other agencies can contribute to our vision moving forward. Beginning in February of 2020, the NYPD will be hosting a monthly youth forum with other law enforcement agencies to discuss and explore best practices to help at-risk youth and prevent violent crimes committed by youth. The important feature of this youth forum is that it will be data-driven, a two-pronged initiative. There will be an element that focuses on preventative measures with at-risk youth that are in danger of becoming involved in the criminal justice system. This portion will not only include law enforcement partners, but also agencies like Administration of Children's Services, Department of Education, and community partners. The intent is to connect at-risk youth to services that are targeted to their specific needs. The other component will address those youths that have committed serious crime. Law enforcement partners will meet to discuss the youths involved in serious crimes and what can be done to intervene and redirect the behavior. Various law enforcement partners will work together to combat youth violence. As I have stated, this initiative will begin in February, and more information will be shared with the public as it continues to take shape. I'd like now to get more specific and begin to go through some of the upticks in 2019 that we saw. So we did see an increase in robberies of 3.1%. That was driven by the borough of, the borough of Manhattan and the borough of Bronx drove those robbery numbers with an increase of approximately 500 victims. When we do an analysis of those robberies, it's being driven by street robberies committed by youths on other youths targeting electronic devices. We've also seen an increase in multiple perpetrator robberies, so 2 or more robbing a single victim. Felony assaults saw a 1.4% increase this year. Some of the upticks that we saw within the felony assault category was domestic violence, felonies. Victims did rise, and that was motivated by strangulation. Also, we did see an uptick on assaults on police officers and also the elderly. Murder. Murder saw an increase of 23 victims, or 7.8%. The police commissioner touched on it. We did have a little larger number of reclassifications than we normally have, but every year reclassifications is part of the data. It's a little complicated. Bottom line is we are an extremely safe city, 3.7 per 100,000. It's not lost. We will continue relentlessly following up on violence in the city. Shootings. Did have an increase of shootings. I did state before that the second part of the year, we started really driving that number down. I think around Labor Day, we were at a high shooting number of 38. We ended the year with an increase of 22 shooting incidents. But as I stated before, the lowest quarter ever for shooting incidents in the city of New York. As far as upticks that we saw, In Manhattan North, in Central and East Harlem, we specifically saw an uptick, and we've drilled down on it between the areas of 110 to 116 Street, approximately St. Nicholas Avenue to Lexington. 20% of the shootings in Manhattan North were within that area. We moved a lot of resources. The borough commander, Chief O'Reilly, moved a lot of resources. So since October, within that zone, which did account for 20% of the Manhattan North robberies, there was one shooting for the rest of the year. So again, relentless follow-up, data-driven, turning intelligence, looking at intelligence analytically, looking at it then operationally, and a lot of resources were put in that area. The other spike that we saw was in the 7-5 precinct in East New York community, Spring Creek, and also Cypress Hills. There was an increase driven by crew violence along with some narco-motivated shootings. Just want to discuss rape. We know rape has consistently been underreported and traditionally an underreported crime. But in recent years, we've seen increased reports of rape and sexual assault from prior years, from incidents 3 and 4 and 5 years in the past. Those numbers have gone up, and we have encouraged victims to come forward as we have overhauled our Special Victims Division and increased training around the trauma of past victimization and effectively and sensitively investigating it. So overall, rape victims did decrease this year, but we saw a uptick in domestic violence rapes. Just domestic violence overall, we did see a little of an uptick of domestic violence. Domestic violence murders, we did see 19.5% of the victims was domestic violence related. Only 6.5% of the domestic violence victims were shot. That is the lowest number since 2003, with never ever being under 10%. So when we took a look at that, we looked at our Field Intelligence Offices program where we ask victims, is there access to a firearm? We recovered 173 firearms this year compared to last year of 65. That is a program that we will continue to exploit. We will continue to arrest domestic violence perpetrators, and we will be targeting firearms in households.
It's a big deal.
It's not only about UCR 7 major crimes that I've been talking about. There are low-level crimes that affect the city of New York. So just taking a look at the misdemeanor crimes, we will continue to move resources, analyze not only 7 majors, but misdemeanors. One of the things that we're taking a look at is petty larceny, shoplifting. We have seen an uptick in that, but we're working with our business owners, we're working with the community, our crime prevention offices, our NCOs are out there being aggressive to try to prevent the shoplifting from happening prior to making an arrest. As far as transit, again, when it's not just about looking at the numbers. So we're taking a look for the calls for service in transit, our 311, 911 calls for service at specific stations. We will be visiting those locations to make sure that conditions are being corrected. As far as misdemeanor crime in transit, do see a little uptake in simple assault, assault 3. That would be a punch and a low-level injury, but it is a problem, and we are going to address it. Just want to remind everybody, an average of 5.5 million people travel on transit every day. 5.5 million people. I think the mayor and the police commissioner touched on it, on arrests. Low-level arrests are down in the city, but 7 major arrests are up, as are gun arrests. So when we talk about precision and we talk about the crimes that we always, are reporting on, we are about precision. And it shows with the arrests. Just want to say thank you very much for being here. And also, it is about the victims. We're going to continue to suppress crime in the city. Thank you very much.
All right, the good news. The good news is when Mike started, the sun was in my eyes. It's setting now, so it's not. We'll take questions. On topic?
Can you elaborate a little bit on the rise in murders and give us an update on the number of murders that were reclassified this year?
Mike?
Sure. So reclassified this year was 27 reclasses to 13 last year. When you look at the reclasses, 9 of those 27 died in 2019. So then when you look at the other 18, 11 out of those 18, 8 were 2 years younger, 2 years or younger. And those were 2018, but it takes time for the ME to come back with the death certificate because of the forensic testing that has to be done very, very carefully. And sometimes these forensic tests are sent out of New York City, so it does take time. And then there's other ones that people had died in the 80s and 90s. Some people die out of state where we'll get a late notification, or sometimes, like I said, we have to wait for the medical examiner to come back with the death certificate. So that explains the 27 reclassifications.
Yes, sir.
The 234 anti-Semitic crimes in 2019, what percentage or how many of them were physical assault and how many of them were personal property?
Rodney? Mike, you got that?
Okay, so assault, simple assault, that's the assault rate of misdemeanor, is down this year. Assault, felony assault, assault 2 is up by 1, and robberies are flat. We see a small increase of 3 crimes with grand larcenies, so that would be
Mike, is this hate crimes? Or?
This is hate crime.
Okay.
Yes. This.
34 anti-Semitic crimes. Can you tell me how many of them were assaults and how many were property crimes like SWAT and stuff?
Yes, those are the numbers I just gave you, sir. So out of your 234, you have 5 assaults, 2s. Those would be felony assaults. You have 9 assault 3s, and you have 2 robberies. The vast majority of the crime within the anti-Semitic motivation is aggravated harassment, which is up approximately 55 crimes. So when you look at those 55 crimes, those are driven by swastikas.
Yeah, I mean, they're all important. Just one last, they're all important. But the vast, vast majority of anti-Semitic crimes that we see, I think Mike said it fluctuates between 70 and 75% are swastikas. And that's playgrounds, that's buses, that's a schoolyard. We saw some recently in a school bathroom. That's the type of thing we're seeing.
I'm wondering, following up on that and the youth forums, how you intend to address the hate crimes and anti-Semitism with the youth forums. I mean, you mentioned swastikas in the bathroom, but certainly some of the incidents clearly involved young people, groups of young people. And what sorts of specific tactics are being taken to try to address that? As opposed to burglaries, which was...
So I'm gonna start it, and I'll kick it to Mike in a second. It's a good question. That what we started, our real desire, if you will, to start the youth meetings was we put such resources into the kids, rightfully so. And if we don't get this right, I've said it before, we're going to be dealing with kids for a long time and not in a positive way. We think there's a tremendous opportunity here. In the room is Chauncey Parker, hiding along the wall to the right, doing an amazing job starting off and really pulling together people throughout New York City that what can we do to provide kids with options. The meeting that started last month and really is going to kick off this month with a lot of high-level people, myself included and Mike, was specifically geared towards robberies, because Mike could throw some statistics at you, and it's really startling. When we see our robbery increase in New York City this year, it's concerning. And when we really drill down, it's very, very apparent. It's kids that are victims, it's kids that are committing these robberies. And it's a real small number, if we can get that number right, that have been in and out of the system multiple times. So Mike can elaborate on that. Certainly the hate crimes will be a part of these discussions, but its focus is on the robberies.
Yes, so like the commissioner said, we took a look at robberies in 2019. We do see an uptick. 29% of all our robbery arrests are under the age of 18. That's concerning. And that's compared to 23% in 2018. And then when you look at the victims since June has just skyrocketed with teenage victims. So it's young youth robbing other youth. And, we want to prevent, and we're working with probation, we're working with corporation counsel, we're working with the district attorney's office, with the youth part to, again, we want to prevent. We also need prosecution. We've identified approximately 80 kids under the age of 18 who've been arrested for 3 or more robberies this year. 3 or more just this year in 2019. So it is a problem. That's why we are focusing our efforts on robberies, but we will be expanding it. We'll be looking at all youth crime, and I just think it's a great opportunity to be working with our law enforcement partners, but also the community and the social service aspect of it to, again, prevent youth from entering the criminal justice system.
So just to give you an idea, Mike, can you touch on some of the domestic angles of what you're seeing, just to give an idea of the holistic?
Yeah, so one of the ideas that came out of one of the meetings in regards to youth robberies was when we respond to a household for a domestic violence call. So to keep the number at a workable level, we identified over 100 youths under the age of 18 who've been on a domestic violence report 6 or more times this year alone, whether it's as a victim or an offender. And then when we look at that and we do an analysis of that, half of those youth have been involved in almost 400 arrests this year. So guardians, parents, they're calling, and a lot of them are calling for the right reason. So we're going to be increasing our home visits to the youth that are at risk, and we're going to also be working with our law enforcement partners to look at the 50 that have been arrested 400 times. So it's a preventative measure. Talk to the Manhattan DA's office about this. We think that there's an opportunity here, again, to prevent and hopefully, not let the youth enter the criminal justice system.
Sure. Can you talk about adding hate crimes to the comp stat, which you mentioned at the top of your remarks? Why the decision to do that now, and how will it help you address the rise in hate crimes that we're seeing?
So thanks for asking that. When you look at the CompStat sheet, which I could probably recite off the top of my head, and it's the major crimes. It's changed over the years. In my former job, doesn't change that often, but every once in a while, things dictate a change. Most recently, we added UCR rape. We've added misdemeanor crimes in the past. And when I was sitting a little to the left in Rodney's seat and hate crimes was under me, I thought of this. So I've been thinking about it for a while. And certainly I can do whatever I want now because I'm the police commissioner. So I think it's the perfect time. I think that the more light you shine on this, the better. And, we do post hate crime statistics already as an agency. I think we are transparent. I think we do it on a monthly basis. Maybe it's quarterly, but I think it's monthly. But there's a difference when you get called down to CompStat as a precinct commander and that sheet is in front of you and you're speaking intimately about everything on that sheet and you live and die by it. And anything to bring this to the forefront of what is going on, to get people talking about it internally as well as externally, I think is a good idea. The trick, Gloria, and what concerns me a little, we have some tech fixes to work out first, and hate crimes is going to mean a lot of different things to a lot of different people. So is it swastikas? Is it misdemeanors? Is it felonies? Is it aggravated? Is it somebody received a letter in the mail, or is it somebody got attacked on the street? So we just have to, we're going to proceed cautiously, But my commitment is we are going to add that to the ComStat sheet in some form, so for transparency purposes.
You're still looking at whether, because you're talking about a majority of these incidents being things like graffiti. So
Yeah.
will something like that be included in the
That's what we have to, I mean, I could certainly just say in precinct X, how many overall hate crimes did you have? And if that number, for example, is 20, but 19 are swastikas and one is a terrible assault, well, they're all terrible, but we just have to work out those details. We won't be secret about it. It'll come. It'll probably take, I would think, probably a few months or so to get the behind the scenes in order, but it's coming.
And are you hoping it'll show you if there is in fact a concentration of these kinds of crimes in specific areas of the city in order to dispatch whatever?
I think the precinct commanders already have an awareness, but for record-keeping purposes, it'll enhance it a little bit. I think people coming to community meetings, which we want to bolster up already, like this information is on the web, but people have to find it. I think people are more comfortable with the traditional ComStat sheet, so nothing is going to change in terms of how a crime is reported, classified, and ultimately kept, but people will be a little more familiar with it this way. Yes, sir.
Okay, you just said the magic word, reported crime. What percentage of crime is not reported? Because you've been in several precincts as a commander, and you know that different crimes are not reported.
I'll tell you many. I mean, I don't know how anyone would give you an accurate number, but much.
I came upon a situation on the borderline of 2 precincts where there was an incident, the car was stolen.
We'll be taking off-topic questions.
Well, it's concerned, because I want to know also about response time. The officers took 20 minutes to respond and then said, well, we covered the other side of the street, not that side of the street. So what is the response time for all these 7 crimes?
That we'd have to get back to you on. And the situation you described shouldn't happen. So if it did, you can give it to us on the side. We'll look into it.
Last week.
Okay.
I haven't gotten a response.
We'll follow up afterwards.
Domestic violence, I was unclear, are the domestic violence murders overall up this year?
Yes, they are. They are up 62 versus 55, so 19.5% of our murder victims were domestic violence related.
And if those victims aren't being shot, how are they being killed?
So 41% of those were cut, and 10 were asphyxiated. That's the number that has really grown from last year. That is correct.
I don't want to put Mike on the spot, but also in that would be probably some of the children with child abuse.
That is correct.
Tony?
In terms of the homicides and shootings in public service housing areas, what proportion of those occur in housing areas? And what has been the trend compared to the last year?
Okay, so approximately 14% of our shootings happen in housing, and that has consistently been the percentage. Housing is obviously 400,000 residents live in public housing in New York City. We put a lot of resources, not only our housing bureau aspect, but also we expect the precincts to work very, very closely with the housing commanders to put a comprehensive plan together to suppress crime and violence in and around housing.
Homicide level in housing areas?
I would have to get back to you on that.
Yes, sir.
So the numbers I got again were the 16 total violent crimes out of the 234. Are those the arrests or the actual complaints? So like the anti-Semitic.
Those are complaints. Yeah.
So that means out of 234, 218 were nonviolent?
So I'm going off. Rodney, you want to?
Yeah.
But the answer is yes. It's letters, it's speech, it's swastikas, all terrible. But that's consistent. That's not necessarily different this year.
Also, out of the 234 complaints, how many were arrested?
Yeah, that's going to be me. Good afternoon, Rodney Harrison. So for hate crime arrests are up for the year-to-date, 182 versus 181. Anti-Semitic arrests are down, 70 versus 80. But in Brooklyn, we were up 49 versus 41.
Any idea why there's been such an uptick in anti-Semitic hate crimes over the end of last year? And the resources you mentioned at the top that are going into some of these neighborhoods, are those all new within the last few weeks, or has some of that been in progress to combat the...
So we have a pretty comprehensive plan. John, you want to jump in terms of throughout the year, in terms of what we do with CRC in a moment, but in terms of Jersey City, in terms of Muncie, certainly that changed the narrative a little in terms of deployment. We have added in the last couple weeks what John will get into in terms of some CRC and SRG deployment. Just now, the 150 or so, those are uniformed police officers coming out of Brooklyn, redeployed specifically to houses of worship and routes to houses of worship, things of that nature.
So most precincts have a HOW car, or house of worship car, that circulates among the houses of worship. When there's something focused on an individual community, whether it was after Christ Church and we did the massive deployment to mosques in the city, or after the incident at St. Patrick's Cathedral, or the attacks on churches on Easter Sunday in Sri Lanka, we shift the resources from the Strategic Response Command and the Critical Response Command under Counterterrorism Bureau to cover those locations till we have a good sense of what the incident overseas or the incident that's the driver of the threat is about. In addition, as the Commissioner mentioned in his open remarks, several months ago we started the thought process of putting together the Remi Unit, which is not to necessarily respond to individual hate crimes, but take a deeper dive at looking at hate groups, hate organizations, hate speech over the internet. That hate speech, even though while protected by the First Amendment, may be part of the unpopular speech that's protected by the First Amendment. Under the Handshoe guidelines, we can investigate groups where there's the possibility of illegal activity. Going backwards through some of the attacks we've seen nationally, whether it was the attack in Pittsburgh or Poway, California, we see individuals emanating from groups that engage in that hate speech acting out in violent crimes. So the Remi Unit is gathering intelligence in that area and developing cases.
More on the front. Do you have any more background on the forces that might have been driving the murders in the city this year? I know in the past you've said that some of them may have been crew related, but you could build on that a little bit or explain.
So actually, crew-related murders are down this year compared to last year. We have seen an increase in bludgeoning and arson. So those are some of the types of murders that are driving the murder number. And like I touched before, the reclassifications also.
Can you elaborate a little bit more on the subway misdemeanor crime? Because the governor and the MTA are saying that the subways are seeing a troubling increase in crime, which is why they want to hire 500 new police officers.
So when you look at the index crime in transit, down for the year, I think Mike can supply you with some of the lower level crimes that we have seen a small uptick in.
So when we look at misdemeanor crime, we're looking at all crimes. So that would include graffiti offenses. Again, that would include the misdemeanor assaults. That would also include low-level controlled substance arrests. So when you take a look at it in a whole, we do have concerns. Some of the concerns we're addressing, misdemeanor assaults, we've put more officers in transit over the past 6 months, and we're going to continue to evaluate it on a daily basis and, really attack the low-level offenses that are concerning.
2% increase, or 5%, or 20%, or roughly misdemeanor?
Again, if you put them all together, all the misdemeanors that I'm describing, it's approximately a 2% increase.
Just to clarify, is it 2% in all misdemeanors?
Yes.
Specifically the ones that you are citing as
It's 2% in all misdemeanors.
Yeah, I don't know, he has different.
Again, that's against the backdrop of overall crime in New York City down. I think Mike said 5.8 million riders in transit, and overall major crimes in transit down, just to have the balanced picture. Gloria?
I think you mentioned this already, but how much of the increase in murder is related to domestic violence?
So it's an increase of seven victims. This year is 62 victims compared to 55. We are, as always, looking ways that we can prevent domestic violence, and then ultimately, if there is a crime, to prosecute it, to make the arrest and prosecute it. And, nothing better than getting that gun out of the household.
To ask you about you mentioned the gun, the guns that you were able to recover. Do you have a breakdown of how many of those were legal? Why was there a gun in the house? Are these police officers? I mean, are you keeping that kind of a breakdown?
I could just tell you the vast majority of those firearms that we recover are illegal.
Thanks, everyone. Who's that for off topic?
Do another crime issue?
Crime off topic.
Thanks for looking out for us.
Yeah, resetting is usually the term of art when people leave. There you go.
Moving on to off topic.
Yes.
Actually, this is kind of still on topic, but off topic too. You mentioned the bail reform. I know you've spoken about it, Commissioner Shea, but how concerned are you in terms of keeping the numbers down in the next quarter, in the coming year, with the bail reform and with the potential for more repeat offenses with people being released?
Yeah, I think it's funny. I was thinking about that and getting ready for today. And that very term, like keeping the numbers down. And Mike hit it, and it's exactly what I thought earlier. It's the opposite of how we think of things. It's always about people and public safety and keeping residents of this city safe. So that's what keeps us up at night. That's what drives us every day. I am an optimist. I do have concerns. I'm on record saying those, but I'm pretty confident that the men and women of this department will rise to any challenge. We'll work with our partners. I mean, I put that into my prepared remarks, and I meant it, that this is not an NYPD issue. This is all New Yorkers, legislators, community groups, everyone. We'll see what's going on. We'll get this right, and we'll move forward. We will keep New Yorkers safe. That's the message.
Related to that, I know the mayor has said, and I believe Commissioner, you said as well, that you would want judges to have discretion based on seriousness. There's another proposal that's out there to put hate crime offenses into the bail eligible category. Would you support that?
Is that coming?
Haven't seen it, so I want to see it before commenting on it for sure.
Where do things stand with the Tessa Major's murder investigation? Those two teenage subjects, have you guys spoken to them again? Are they anywhere closer to being taken into custody, or what's going on there?
Yeah, hey, Mark. So we haven't brought them back in for any more questioning. Just to let you know, I think I briefed you maybe 2 days before New Year's Eve. Pretty much, we're still waiting for some forensic evidence to come back. It's a methodical investigation. We're working closely with the Manhattan District Attorney's Office. The one thing that I have to emphasize to everybody is each time we had the subjects in our custody, they did have some type of legal or guardian representation with them throughout the whole process. So I want to make sure that's very, very clear. But we're still waiting for some more items of DNA to come in, and then we'll be looking forward to working with the district attorney's office and charging them for the crime.
About that, about there being sort of a bite mark on one of the suspects that she had bitten down during the robbery?
Yeah, so Mark, there's a judicial process that I kind of got to protect. I don't want to have it jeopardized, so I'm not going to talk about any evidence regarding the subjects involved.
Follow-up to that, are you expecting DNA results this week?
Hopefully. I can't give you an exact time frame, but hopefully we'll get everything in by the end of the week.
Yeah, if I could just cue off of Erin's question, because I think the proposal she was asking about was super straightforward. I mean, it's just from Assemblyman Eichenstein in Brooklyn to include hate crimes as a qualifying offense of which a judge will have discretion in setting bail. And I mean, I think he raised that while seeing suspects in anti-Semitic attacks hop in and out of court. So I mean, just to test straightforwardly, do you support bringing hate crimes back as something that would qualify you for bail, Mayor de Blasio, Commissioner Shea?
The Assembly member is someone I think very highly of, and directionally that sounds right, but again, I'm not going to comment until I see the specific proposal.
Shea, I mean, you've said, I think this is the second time you said you have concerns over bail reform. What exactly are those concerns?
I've said it before. I look forward to, the NYPD voice as this process goes forward to make the city and state safer in terms of things that we can add to it. But I've gone on record and mentioned giving judges discretion, some of the discovery issues, things of that nature.
So a suspect like Tiffany Harris get arrested, appear before a judge, be released, arrested again. Does that raise concerns for you that maybe this was all a misguided idea?
I want to say that raises concerns to me about the process before any new legislation happened. The whole idea here is that someone who has a history of violence and a history of documented mental illness is supposed to be handled differently. And what is clear in this case is that there is real work to be done between prosecutors, NYPD, health agencies, social service agencies. We have got to knit all this together much more intensively. This is a lot of what was looked at in the 30-day review that Chief Monahan and Commissioner Barbeau did. That, to me, is the much more pertinent question here. We've got people who clearly have evinced a pattern, and that pattern has to be dealt with. That was true before any new legislation. That's true today. That's what we have to fix.
One last thing, I mean, in that particular case, there was a report that your office got involved and that after the second time Ms. Harris was released, I guess the rumor or something was that your office requested for the judge to set an additional court appearance, which led to a warrant for her arrest. Did that happen? Any comment on that?
I don't know what the judge did. And again, I mentioned prosecutors and police and social service agencies and health agencies, and I obviously should mention judges as well who have an obligation here. I absolutely made an inquiry because of the very point I just made, that we have got to start gluing these pieces together differently than has ever been done before. And that's been the direction of a whole host of things that we have done in this administration, including the NYC SAFE initiative. But what's really clear is it's going to take a lot more work to get a whole host of agencies, some of them are cities, some of them are state, like obviously the judges, to think very differently about this and act very differently. So the judge made their own decision, but what I'm going to try and do, and my team is going to try and do, is push everyone to get on the same page that when we see that definition met, that is supposed to trigger a full review of the individual to see what needs to be done and including what kind of required mental health support they need to get. And it seems just from what we all saw publicly related in this case that wasn't happening, and that's why I made an inquiry.
Just related to that, I wonder, you're talking about a big sea change involving multiple agencies and parts of the government. Are you concerned about what's going to happen with bail reform in getting there? And that, like, every time something like that happens, are you going to have to intervene? And what did you learn from the Harris situation?
It's a very fair question, but I want to, again, the question's fair, but it begs the bigger question, so allow me just to set it. So I think the statistic is something like 90% of people arrested before the new law got out on bail. So we got to be really clear that we're talking about facts here. The whole idea of the bail reform is that someone should not be held in simply because they can't afford bail, and we all saw plenty of horrifying examples of that. Khalif Browder's the worst example, but there were many, many. So the bail reform was necessary, but I think there's been a little bit of amnesia on the fact that the vast majority of people previous to the bail reform were, of course, making bail and out on the streets awaiting trial. And this is a country where people are considered innocent until proven guilty. The issue here has nothing to do with bail or bail reform from my point of view. The issue here is that you've seen for decades folks with that combination of a documented mental health problem and a documented violence problem that there was no protocol for dealing with that was actually functional. And we are going to have to do something very different. And the fact that it involves all those agencies is, you're right, that is daunting. It's going to take a huge culture change, and that's what the 30-day review points out. But we're going to find a way with all the tools we have to make that the new normal. We've got to get every part of the equation. So again, judges, prosecutors, police, health agencies, social service agencies, all thinking the same thing, that when someone meets those criteria, there needs to be a full review. That, to me, is the crux of the matter. And if we get that part right, I think we can really protect a lot of people, including the folks with the mental illness. But it's something that's never been done properly, and we have to find a way to do it.
Commissioner Shea, with the new city council regulations for placard abuse, can you speak to what the NYPD is doing to obey that, and how many units they're adding where you're patrolling?
Sure, Chief Morris is going to address that.
Good afternoon. I'm William Morris. I'm the Chief of Transportation. You know, the new law, basically, it just kind of directs us in terms of enforcement. Commissioner Shea used the term before, precision policing, and that's what this is about. We have had a placard unit in the Transportation Bureau for a while now, and you know, it's worth it to put out some of these statistics. In 2019, we gave out 55,000 placard summonses. You know, that compares with 2014, where we only gave out 29,000 placard summonses. So if you look at it, that's an 88% increase over time. But if you dive a little deeper into it, in 2018, you know, it was 54,000. So moving from 2018 to 2019, it was less than a 1% increase in terms of placard enforcement. So you can see that although it's been a marked change since 2014, it's been an incremental change as we move forward. To answer your question, there is a dedicated unit within the Transportation Bureau that goes out. Each team is under the supervision of a sergeant. They respond to sources of complaints, including 311 complaints, community complaints. We also analyze where there have been recent fatalities involving bicyclists and pedestrians, and we look at areas like that for enforcement.
Since the death of the Iranian general, has the NYPD or any city agency seen any concerted cyber attack against its computer networks? And going forward, regardless of whether there had been any, are you hardening your capability in that area?
So, Tony, I'll let John come up here, but I think when you look at this framework of what we're seeing here, this is something that you're going to hear John say that we've been planning for. Multiple eventualities, including cyber, including target hardening, multiple structures. So in terms of what we're seeing post this, John?
And I'm actually going to jump in one point before John. I want to emphasize to everyone this is a very long game we're going to be playing here. One of the commentaries I saw the other day made clear that the Iranians are patient in their responses, and that's not a compliment, it's just a fact. I'm going to be here for 2 more years. For the entire 2 years, I'm going to be worried about something based on the actions of the Iranian government coming back to hurt New York City. So we cannot for a moment think this is, if it doesn't happen soon, that means it's not going to happen. We have to be very, very vigilant. And as for the cyber efforts for the entire city government, those have been building intensively because Iran is one of many enemies of this country that might target New York City in some form or fashion. So that's a constant building program. Go ahead, John.
So, Tony, as the commissioner said, we didn't start thinking about this just over the last couple of days. But as a result of the death of General Soleimani and calls for retaliation, what we have done is coordinated between NYPD cyber people, Jeff Brown, who runs New York City Cyber Command that protects the web infrastructure of the entire city government, its agencies, as well as Jesse Tisch, the commissioner at DO IT. Over the weekend, working with the FBI, we culled together the relevant lists of malware that's been identified as having come from Iranian government agencies or proxies, that to include not just the malware itself, but also the IP addresses associated with that, the particular signatures associated with that. We distributed that not only to our city agencies to reinforce, are your lists up to date, but also to our critical infrastructure partners, whether that's cellular telephone providers, power, water, and so on. So we've invested some effort in getting ready on the prevention side, and we're going to continue to monitor that day by day and minute by minute as a team with the FBI.
Okay, going back to the cyclists, how many deaths occurred in 2019, the final number? What was it in 2018? And how are bicyclists going to be protected in 2020?
There were 220 fatal collisions involving all motorists and persons in 2019. Of those, specific to your question, 28 involved bicyclists. That's an increase from 10 in 2018. Now, you asked about what we're doing as we move forward. We have a strategy that we began today. We're looking at keeping our cyclists safe and targeting dangerous driving behavior. So I'll just give you a couple of things. The Traffic Enforcement Division is focusing on summoning vehicles parked in bike lanes. Our Truck Enforcement Unit is looking at truck safety. We're focusing towing of vehicles that are in bike lanes. We're looking also at drivers who are operating vehicles at excessive speeds. And we're also having highway targeting trucks that are driving at excessive speeds on highways. And also we're working with our counterparts in all of the precincts throughout the city to identify problematic locations.
Gloria?
If I could go back to Iran, there was a report today that some Iranian accounts were tweeting about attacking New York-specific landmarks, Trump-specific locations. Just wondering if you have anything on that and if there's any additional more than what you're already doing in light of that.
What I'll just say is that we have a very robust intelligence network that's set up to collect intelligence, to share with our partners. We have multiple federal task forces that all of what they do each and every day is think about these things and how to keep New Yorkers safe. In terms of specific threats, we won't get into any specific threats, but we constantly monitor that threat stream and deploy accordingly.
And If I could also ask about there was an anti-Semitic incident in the 7-1 on Saturday. If you have any further details, I believe it was a man yelling anti-Semitic slurs to someone else.
So if you're talking about the one on at 1018 Eastern Parkway? In the 7-1? Yeah. Yep. At 4 o'clock, pretty much a complainant was approached by a male and a female who attempted to pull her wig off. The wig was not removed, and the subjects involved ran away laughing. Our hate crimes task force is conducting the investigation with that, and we'll see what we could do regarding bringing that person into custody.
I will tell you that when and I can't quote them now, but when the question came before about the hate crimes and arrest statistics, what at times hurts us there is the swastikas, because quite frankly, sometimes these things are months or a year old, and it's a challenge. But where we do see the majority of our arrests on anti-Semitic crimes is instances such as that, where the few times that there actually is in person, such as an assault, or just terrible incidents like that, the Hate Crimes Task Force is very methodical about following up and making an arrest. In the back? You were waiting.
Yes, I've been waiting. Commissioner, as the Harvey Weinstein case trial started today, are there any additional cases or reports that's being investigated by the NYPD?
So we investigate every single sex crime very seriously. Regarding the Harvey Weinstein case, I think today is the first day of trial. The sex crime unit did a phenomenal job with the investigation, but that's all I'm going to say about anything else with the case.
In the back?
Yeah. Commissioner, is there any way to quantify on anti-Semitic violence, anti-Semitic attacks, any way to quantify better reporting versus more incidents? I mean, could it be, with all the media attention, that you're hearing about these crimes more now than before?
That's certainly a possibility and something that we're aware of, but I think that's a good thing. It goes in line with what we spoke about before in shedding a light. If this stays something that we're not talking about, it's hard to do outreach. It's hard to teach whether you want to go the avenue of educating children. If you want to do deployment, everything starts with that initial crime report. So are some of the incidents, I mean, we know that some of them are quite old that are being reported, but that's not necessarily a bad thing.
Going back to the Tessa mayor's investigation, do you plan on making any additional arrests, and when will the autopsy results be released?
So regarding the autopsy results, I can't give you an exact time frame. And once again, it's still a methodical, I'll use the commissioner's words, investigation. We want to make sure we have all the evidence prepared to present to the Manhattan District Attorney's Office to make an arrest in this case.
Great. Thanks, everyone.
All right. Who's up? Please.
Governor Cuomo announced today that the NYPD pound should be vacated from Pier 76 by the end of the year and replaced by green space and market uses. Wondering what you think of the announcement, what you think should go there. Will the city contribute financially? And then just as a second part, what do you think should happen at Pier 40?
So, have not seen the details of the governor's announcement. Directionally, I obviously think, we've talked about this before, we'd like to get to the day where the tow pound wasn't there, but operationally we have a challenge. We need the capacity in Manhattan to handle that need, and we don't have that right now. So that's something we're going to all have to work on together. As you know, Hudson River Park is, in effect, a joint jurisdiction, state and city. We're going to have to work on that together.
Rescuing car crash victims anytime soon?
I'm sorry, what? Oh, I was like struggling. I think it's a very, very admirable thing, and the next time I come upon one, I certainly will. Okay.
Increased patrols around synagogues and Jewish neighborhoods, is that something that's only going to be the immediate aftermath of attacks, or is this something that is going to be, to borrow a phrase we used earlier, a new normal? It's going to be a long-term plan.
Let me say it this way. There was a phrase that, I was brought up by people from the World War II generation, and so they would use the phrase "for the duration," which meant as long as we were dealing with a crisis, that capacity will be applied to address the crisis. Obviously, we all want this crisis to end. We all want to get to the normal we had before. That's the normal I believe in, where people could, in this city, of all cities on the earth, that anybody of any background could walk the streets in peace. Anybody of any faith could exhibit the symbols of their faith and peace, and certainly the Jewish community, after thousands of years of oppression, I think would be safe to say this is one of the places in the history of the world the Jewish community found the most refuge, the most support, the most peace. We want to restore that reality 110%. Until we're certain that is the case, that unit will be applied to the areas where the need is greatest.
Mr. Mayor, in the yeshiva review that was Chancellor recently wrote to the state about, he had identified 5 schools that were considered underdeveloped. Some of them didn't have any secular education or had limited classrooms in English. They weren't identified in the letter, but also the DOE is refusing to identify those schools. Given how much information is publicly available about public schools, why aren't you making this, why aren't you identifying those?
Yeah, I think there's both. I'm not a lawyer, as you know, but there's legal sensitivities and there's also sensitivities related to how do we actually achieve the change that we need. The list, I believe, of all the schools, the sort of the total universe is there, and then the breakdown. It really is a strategic matter. We believe that by engaging these schools, we can get where we need to get, and I think there's a lot of evidence in that letter that's true. But I also said very publicly, those 5 schools have to respond vigorously soon, or else they're going to find, both in terms of the city and the state, that they have a bigger problem on their hands, and that their funding could be undermined. So I think it's right. We're not trying to shame people. We're trying to get results.
Along those same lines, do you plan at least to notify the parents in those schools so that they're aware of what?
It's a fair question, and again, I want to be aware of any legal questions there, and state, we're obviously governed by what the State Department of Education tells us is appropriate to do. It's a fair question. Let me come back to you on that after I've done some consultation. We want, obviously, I say this as a parent, we want parents to have all the information that they can have, but again, we're dealing with an unusual situation. This is not a school system we control directly.
Briefly,
Please.
And the probe by DOI and SCI of the DOE's investigation, were you interviewed for that?
No.
Mayor, you made a pledge to reduce the city to zero waste by 2030. Since the time you made that promise, the amount of waste exported has actually increased Do you still think you're on track for the goal? And if so, how is that possible considering that this has gone in the wrong direction?
Well, I mean, look, the one, I do think we can achieve the goal. The goal is still a decade off. Two, we a little bit have been victims of our own success. The amount of economic activity in the city continues to increase. You know, we've added 500,000 jobs in the last 6 years. I mean, there's a number of things that are happening that would naturally increase the amount of waste. I see progress in a number of areas. We are obviously, what we've done initially on organics has reached a pretty substantial swath of the city. We think there's a lot of ways to improve the amount of recycling, the previous types of recycling, and get them to be higher levels of collections. We see some real progress in our schools that used to not really be a part of recycling and organics collection. I think the commercial waste zones will help. I think there's a number of pieces in play that are going to help. Is it a tough goal? Absolutely. But I still believe we can make it, and a decade's a long time. Yeah.
Traffic deaths, overall traffic deaths went up in 2019, and specifically looking at hit and run drivers, I think the arrest rate is around 40% the first 3 quarters of 2019. When you look at people injured by hit and run drivers, that arrest rate goes down to like 9%. What is the city doing to, I guess, target those hit and run drivers specifically? What should you be doing more of in the future?
I'll start, and my colleagues, I imagine, will have something to say on this too. And what I'll say about PD that I've noticed more and more over the last 6 years is the ability to capture video from a variety of sources. I think that's an area that there's been steady improvement. I think that's very, very important when it comes to hit and run drivers, obviously. I also think public education is important. I think as a result of the 6 years of Vision Zero, I think more and more people are coming forward and they're outraged when they see a hit and run incident, and if they have information, they're sharing it with us. But I think it comes back to everything that achieves safety, the increased NYPD enforcement on things like speeding and failure to yield, the increased number of speed cameras, and you're going to continue to see those grow as a result of what was achieved last year in Albany. The increased number of bike lanes and protected bike lanes. I think all these things are going to protect more and more people, and they're going to help us get at people who are habitually speeding, especially the speed cameras and the enforcement. But on the specific question of hit and run, we all know it's hard to enforce, but I do think NYPD is increasing its ability to do so. You want to add? Or?
The only thing I'll say is, I think the mayor hit it with the technology certainly ages, but there are some obstacles there too. The point of both the collision investigation squad and then the local detective squads that handle the accidents that don't result in serious injury or death is bringing a prosecutable case to the district attorney, and it's a process. It's a process of gathering as much evidence as possible and getting to the point where the prosecutor is willing to go forward. There's a number of obstacles, and not the least of which is sometimes it's identifying the car is not the whole story. It's then who's driving the car and proving that they were in the car. And then you get into, well, what are the injuries? And every injury, if it's me, is important, but what are the injuries in the particular case? And then is the prosecutor going to go to trial if it's a quote-unquote minor injury? So there's a lot behind that. It's certainly something that we should continue to strive to get better at.
Who hasn't gone yet? Way back.
Mr. Mayor, getting back to what you were talking about with people who are violent and have mental illness, it's my understanding a lot of times when the police officers arrest some of these people, bring them to a hospital, they're immediately released from the hospital almost before the cops get back to the precinct. Is there something in the short term that can be done to ensure that some of these suspects who are violent and do have mental illness, there is something, I want to say a lot, but there is some kind of recourse so that they're not immediately brought back to the street?
It's a great question, and I won't speak for the non-public hospitals. I think we can work with them and sensitize them, and certainly that's something that in terms of our Deputy Mayor for Health and Human Services and our Health Commissioner, I want them to do. But let's talk about our public hospitals, which is the place where we can have the most impact. You know, Dr. Mitch Katz, as the CEO of H&H, has made very clear that these evaluations have to be done carefully and appropriately. It's not supposed to be a revolving door. It's supposed to be a very intensive process to make sure that if someone needs additional help, that they get it. And depending on what their specific situation is, they get the amount of help they need. And if they need additional evaluation, they get that additional evaluation. So what's becoming clear to me, we started things like NYC Safe years ago to move the city in this direction. But again, the sheer complexity of the task, getting all the different agencies on the same page about how painstaking this work needs to be. That's where we have to do a lot better. I am confident, though, in terms of health and hospitals, that this is the kind of message that Mitch Katz is giving to his team and that that's going to make a difference. Katie.
I wanted to ask you, Mayor and Commissioner, your thoughts on how the street closures around Rockefeller Center went around the holidays, and if you would have any consideration into making them permanent and then taking a look at other really populated streets and perhaps closing those to traffic as well.
Initial answer is I think it was a success, but I've asked for a formal evaluation, and I want to hear what that says before giving you a final verdict. But from what I saw, it succeeded because we had really huge crowds, and it helped keep those folks safe. And generally, NYPD, DOT, everyone was able to handle the traffic impact. But we'll come back with more definition on that. Permanent, not from my vantage point at this point for those two streets. Certainly always looking at different proposals. Everything's on the table in terms of, you know, anytime we think something particularly will help keep people safer. But from what I can see, it's really that concentrated time around the holidays where the need is greatest there. And then as a general idea going forward, you know, there have been some areas of the city, obviously over years, where streets have been closed off successfully. It's something I talked about in the last year or so. We're going to look at some other particular areas in Lower Manhattan that might make sense. But that's very case by case. Do you have anything to add?
I would just say by any measures, I think the season was a success in terms of we had very nice weather. You look at New Year's Eve as an example, huge crowds. I have not gotten a lot of complaints about the setup as it was constructed, but going forward, it'll be a question for us. Certainly, Commissioner of Traffic, et cetera, Transportation, and see if we can make improvements.
Who has not gone? Yeah.
Okay, NYCHA has been one big problem for you. In 2016, you said to me it would take $18 billion to bring NYCHA up to par. Last year, you told me it would take $38 billion.
32.
32, pardon me. Congresswoman Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez has a new green program that she wants for NYCHA, where she's trying to bring $54 billion, I believe, I could be wrong, to NYCHA, to bring NYCHA up to where it should be and self-sufficient. Have you spoken to the Congresswoman on that program, and do you support it?
I have not spoken to her about it. I agree with, and so I don't know the specific proposal, but it's obviously related to a couple other big proposals. Green New Deal, which I agree with. The idea of making public housing part of a national infrastructure plan, which I absolutely agree with. Yeah, anything that would create additional resources for NYCHA, help us fix buildings, help us make buildings green, of course. So I'm sure we are aligned on that. But to your underlying point when you asked the opening there, that difference between the estimate that we saw at the beginning of the administration and now 6 years later, it's doubled, almost doubled, $32 billion now. That should be a real warning sign to all New Yorkers that here are buildings that are overwhelmingly 50, 60, 70 years old or more, and have now gone through about 40 years of systematic disinvestment because of what's happened in Washington, because it was always supposed to be that federal funds were the core support for public housing. So we have a big hole here. The city's investing a lot. I am hopeful that we might get some more progress on the federal budget, separate from what you're talking about, but if we could get that bigger infusion, it could be transcendent for NYCHA. Yeah.
The governor today
They announced a plan, desire, proposal to bring 8 more tracks to the Penn Station. But to do that, they'd have to commandeer the block south of the station. Any thoughts on that?
You have not been briefed on that one either, but I will tell you that the idea of increasing the capacity of Penn Station, something I've said, I think even going back to when I was public advocate, is really important to the long-term future of New York City. I mean, it's part of how we keep our current train capacity running better than it is, but beyond that, the future, if we're going to address climate change, we're going to have to use mass transit, we're going to have to use trains a whole lot more. So having the ability to expand what can go in and out of Penn Station is very important. So again, right direction, but need to see the specific plan before I can comment further. You got one way back there?
Commissioner, do you have any updated information on Friday's hit and run in Brooklyn where the elderly woman was struck in crosswalk?
I do not. I'll have to get back to you on that.
Gloria?
Mr. Mayor, the governor's state of the state is this week. I'm wondering if you plan to attend, and if you could also just talk to us about your agenda for Albany and some of the things you are hoping to hear from the governor in his speech this year.
Yeah, I will attend, and it's similar to a lot what we talked about last year's. I'd like to see real movement in terms of state support to help us address homelessness. I'd like to see some progress on education funding. I would like to see additional support for NYCHA. I think those are, right now, I'll have more to say obviously when I'm up there, but those are 3 areas of immediate concern. Who has not gone? Anyone not gone? Go ahead.
Just on the same topic, I'm just wondering if you're kind of bracing for a bigger hit than normal from Albany because of the size of the potential debt.
Well, it's a mixed bag from what we're seeing so far. And again, this will all play out. There obviously is a real Medicaid issue. And at the same time, you know, there's many different ways that could be addressed. And I think we're seeing some strengthening of state revenue lately, and that's a good thing for everyone. So the pattern over the last few years is that we've had real challenges in Albany, and we've had to fight hard to minimize the damage for New York City. I certainly start with that assumption, but magnitude's really hard to tell at this point.
Read the Politico piece about waste?
I did not.
Okay. I wondered, it delved into the human toll of the city's waste on very poor communities in Newark and upstate New York. You've got parents pulling their kids out of school districts because the parking lot of the school is covered in dust. You've got toxins being emitted from the incinerator in Newark, where a student body is one of the most economically disadvantaged. What's your response to that, to the people living in those communities who, you know, see the wealth that we have here in New York and see us dumping our garbage into
Yeah, I first of all, you know, I care about people whether they live here or live somewhere else, and I certainly care about kids in particular everywhere. We want to make sure we're working with everyone to keep kids safe, but I don't know the specifics, so I have to see the report. I have to confirm, you know, from the city's government's perspective what's accurate, what's not, before I can give you a fuller answer. But there's something that needs to be addressed. We're certainly going to try to address it. Go ahead.
The Muncie and Jersey City attackers all seem to be inspired by the Black Hebrew Israelite movement. What can you tell us about that movement's presence in New York?
I'm going to be careful I just want to be careful in saying I don't know if we can fully conclude from Muncie, at least based on the last report I received, where there's still a lot more to know. So just want to caution, but you go ahead.
Among others.
Again, I'm not sure that tells us everything, but go ahead.
So you're talking about 2 outside jurisdictions that we are working extremely close with through the JTTF as well as through our intelligence bureau. I'm going to concur in that I certainly have read many of the reports that you have read. Any group, and I'm not specifically talking the Black Israelites here, but any group that professes hate is a group that we would be interested in learning about. This is the very reason when you hear the Remi Unit formed. This is an example of something that would follow along those lines. But in terms of those 2 shootings or any nexus to that church in this, I'm not going to comment.
Commissioner, Councilmember Constantinides sent you a letter asking you to stop tracking down on e-bike delivery cyclists. particularly because the throttle-based e-bikes are used by low-income immigrants. Is that something you're going to grant? And could you talk about the process of the e-bike crackdown, given that there's legislation in Albany that was just vetoed by the governor, but there seems to be overwhelming support for legalizing?
I think that we have a balanced approach as it is. The first and foremost, we care about safety. So when you heard some of the numbers earlier about traffic fatalities, that's concerning. It's going to take a concerted effort, a well-thought-out strategy to make sure that we have the right balance of enforcement, education, et cetera. We all want the same thing. How we get there, we'll continue to work with our partners to make sure we get there.
And again, I always am concerned about immigrants, and I'm concerned about working people and people struggling to make ends meet. But I want to pick up where the commissioner left off. This is safety first. First of all, the e-bikes that are illegal are illegal. We've been over this 1,000 times, and we're going to enforce on something illegal. Second, the pedal assist bikes are legal. Again, I would like a little more common sense in this equation. The pedal assist bikes are legal. Traditional bicycles are legal. Motorcycles that follow the traffic laws are legal. There's lots of other ways to go about this. So we're going to work to try and get a formula in Albany we can work with. And I actually thought, the governor had signed the bill, we would be now going into the process of detailing the city's rules. But in the meantime, I feel like this debate is missing the fact that if folks want to do that work, there are plenty of options to do it legally. And what we need is bikes that do not go that fast and create a danger.
Data that shows that these throttle-based e-bikes are more dangerous than the pedal?
Again, everyone asked that question. I keep coming back with something that is bluntly, in my view, better than data. It is common sense. I have seen them with my own eyes, as have so many people I have talked to all over the city. They go on sidewalks. They go wrong way down the street. They go too fast. Get something that actually fits. Follow the traffic laws with a vehicle that's meant to follow the traffic laws, or take one of the legal options that exist, but it's an illegal alternative. I'm not gonna be sorry about something when there's an illegal option that people are using when they have instead legal options they're not using. It's as simple as that. Katie.
I wanted to go back to the political story on trash. I guess it's the first of a series this week. I know you sort of said you hadn't read it and you're not sure how true it is, but Commissioner Garcia, your own sanitation commissioner, said in it that the city's getting close to not being able to get there in time in terms of getting the zero waste goal. How often do you check in with her on the city's trash goals? And I know you said a decade's a long time, but even the commissioner of the sanitation department doesn't think it's attainable. Is there?
Well, last time I met with her was last week, but I want to make sure respectfully that you're taking in the fullness of what she said. We work all the time to achieve a lot of goals that are difficult goals. We've got a decade. If she's saying she's concerned there's more to be done, of course. But I've not heard from her or anyone else that we can't reach the goal. Okay, we're about to shut down. Go ahead.
Trump question. A number of elected officials and others have described his recent actions as really erratic. Do you think the 25th Amendment should be invoked to remove him from office? If not, what else should be done?
I think there's an election that should remove him from office. Obviously, I'm someone who believes that what he has done warrants impeachment. But I'm also someone realistic enough to say that that does not look likely at this point. And there's an election now in 10 months. So I think that's the way to do it. But I do fear these most recent actions a lot. I was saying it the other day. I feel like we're a lot less safe now, and there's a lot of danger up ahead. But it's a democracy. We have to follow a democratic process. Thanks, everyone.
Anything you want to say about the football game?
About what?
Either of you?
About what? Yeah, Dermot said some very controversial things at the recruit swearing in, and I just want to say I was deeply troubled.
There was an interception or something? Maybe
Interception. Dermot does not care where Tom Brady plays next year.
So I'm gonna, I think, boy,
Next year, right?